Hey there, fellow thrill seekers. Ever wonder what it would be like to stand at the very precipice of the world changing? To witness the moment when the ordinary cracks and something truly terrifying spills through? What if that moment wasn't some far-off dystopia, but right here, right now, in the sterile, supposed safety of a hospital? If that question sends a shiver down your spine, then you've come to the right place. Welcome, newcomers, and a hearty welcome back to my loyal survivors. If you're joining us for the first time, hitting that subscribe button will make sure you never miss another tale from the edge of reality. It's your support that fuels these stories, keeping them coming week after week. And while you're settling in, drop a comment below. Let me know where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. All right, let's dive into tonight's chilling account. This isn't just any hospital story. This is the story of how hospital lockdown became a phrase etched in terror, how emergency alert announced not safety, but the dawn of nightmare, and how words like zombie outbreak and infected clawed their way from the fringes of fiction into the harsh glare of reality. To truly grasp the gravity of what unfolded, we need to rewind. Back to a night that started like any other, back to when I, then just a wide-eyed intern named Alex, thought my biggest challenge would be deciphering doctors' hurried instructions and surviving on lukewarm coffee. It began on a Tuesday, if memory serves, but the day of the week soon became utterly irrelevant. It was late October, the air already biting with the promise of winter. My shift at County General's emergency department was overnight, a trial by fire for any fresh-faced medical intern. My role, as they concisely put it, was to be everywhere and nowhere all at once. In reality, it meant a whirlwind of checking vital signs, triaging patients, deciding who needed help most urgently in the relentless flow of human vulnerability, and generally navigating the controlled chaos that was the ED's nightly symphony. I was still finding my footing, still learning to filter out the constant beeping monitors, the hushed urgent phone calls, the cries of pain, and the weary sighs of seasoned nurses. The biggest hurdles were usually less about medical emergencies themselves and more about reassuring families teetering on the edge of panic or juggling the endless mountain of administrative tasks that seemed designed to test your sanity more than your medical competence. But from the moment I walked through those automatic sliding doors that night, there was a shift. Something in the air, a subtle tremor in the usual hospital hum. It wasn't loud, not immediately obvious, but like a low-frequency vibration, just under the threshold of perception, yet undeniably there. A tension that clung to the sterile air, almost imperceptible at first, yet impossible to ignore as the night deepened. Earlier, on my drive in, I'd caught a fractured snippet of an emergency alert crackling through my car radio as I pulled into the hospital parking garage. It was a jarring interruption to the usual late-night DJ banter, a scratchy, monotone voice, devoid of human inflection, warning citizens to remain indoors. Some vague, bizarre, generalized message about an unknown contagion supposedly sweeping through sectors of the city. Before I could even process it or grasp any concrete detail, I dismissed it. Citywide alert? Probably just some overblown reaction to a flu outbreak, or maybe a chemical spill scare downtown. Local news stations thrived on sensationalism. I'd learned to take most of these alerts with a healthy dose of skepticism. I clicked off the radio, the monotone warning already fading into the background of my thoughts. The hospital lobby, typically bustling even at this hour, felt different. The usual gentle hum of overhead fluorescent lights was there, the occasional rhythmic beep from cardiac monitors in the admissions bay, and the low murmur of on-duty staff exchanging shifts. But tonight, everyone seemed restless. An undercurrent of unease rippled through the conversations. It was subtle, but if you listened, really listened, you started to catch phrases, snippets of worry. Strange bites, someone murmured near the reception desk. Agitated behavior floated from a cluster of nurses near the coffee station. Did you hear about? Then, Janice, one of the senior nurses, a woman who had seen it all in her 20 years in the ED and usually possessed a calm that could defuse any crisis, pulled me aside the moment she saw me clocking in. "Alex, hey, have you heard? What's happening out there?" she asked, her eyes darting around the relatively quiet lobby, as if the very walls had ears. There was a nervousness in her usually steady gaze that was instantly unsettling. Heard what? Just that emergency alert on the radio on my way here. Sounded like the usual overreaction. I shrugged, trying to downplay the vague feeling of unease that was starting to prickle my own skin. Janice shook her head, lowering her voice conspiratorially, even though there were few patients in the waiting area at this hour. Trust me, kiddo, something's going on. We've been getting calls. Paramedics are reporting people attacking strangers in the streets, saying they're acting wild. Like, not themselves. My skepticism started to waver. Janice wasn't prone to hyperbole. Attacking? Like violent. She nodded, her eyes widening slightly. That's what they're saying. And get this. Some of the paramedics, they're calling it a zombie outbreak. She forced a small, nervous laugh as she said the word zombie, as if testing the sound of it, trying to inject a dose of humor into something palpably unfunny. It sounded absurd, ridiculous even, coming from Janice, yet her unease was infectious. Just be ready, okay? I have a really bad feeling. I think it might be a long night. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. A zombie outbreak? It was laughable, preposterous. Yet, looking at Janice's usually unflappable face, now etched with genuine worry, laughter died in my throat. Something was definitely off. Very off. The first hour of my shift ticked by with a deceptive normalcy. We had the usual trickle of late-night cases, a sprained ankle from a clumsy stumble, a lingering cough that had finally escalated to respiratory distress, a fretful mother with a child sporting a mild, and likely overdiagnosed, rash. Routine. Predictable. Almost comforting in its mundane familiarity. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe Janice was just overreacting. Maybe it was just another local scare, destined to be clarified and dismissed by the morning news cycle. Then, around midnight, the ambulance bay doors rattled violently, the sudden, harsh sound slicing through the fragile veil of normalcy. Paramedics burst through, pushing a gurney at breakneck speed. On the stretcher, a man was strapped down, thrashing against the restraints with alarming force. He was mumbling incoherently, guttural sounds that weren't quite words, and his eyes were unfocused, wild, darting erratically, and he kept snapping at the air like a cornered animal trying to bite its way out of a trap. I'd never seen anything like it. Not in real life. Only in zombie movies. The thought flashed, unwelcome and absurd, through my mind. Male, mid-30s, one of the paramedics yelled, his voice strained, barely audible over the patient's frantic struggling. Found wandering in traffic. Possible bite marks on his arm. Became aggressive en route. The paramedic's voice shook, just a tremor, a barely perceptible hint of unease that spoke volumes louder than his words. We rapidly wheeled the gurney into a vacant bed in a curtained-off area, the wheels squealing in protest against the sudden sharp turns. Two burly security guards, usually stationed at the entrance to deter unruly visitors, materialized as if from nowhere and helped restrain the man's flailing limbs, preventing him from lashing out at the medical staff swarming around. Although the paramedic had yelled about bite marks, in the chaos, I'd only caught a fleeting glimpse. The man's left sleeve was ripped and torn, and there was a crusty, dark outline staining his forearm. Part of my training screamed at me to lean in, to examine, to document, to understand. But another, more primal instinct urged me to step back, to keep a safe distance from the raw, uncontained violence radiating from the man on the bed. My immediate task was to help the security guards, to keep him still, secure, so a Dr. Ramirez, the overnight attending physician, could actually approach and assess him. Over the next half hour, the ambulance bay doors became a revolving door of terror. More paramedics arrived, each with a chillingly similar story. Individuals found disoriented, agitated, combative, often in public spaces, parks, bus stops, even inside their own homes. Some, unsettlingly, presented with injuries that looked suspiciously, disturbingly like they came from human teeth. One older woman, frail and trembling violently, arrived wrapped in thermal blankets. She was shivering so intensely that we had to physically hold her on the bed to keep her from vibrating right off the mattress. Another man, barely conscious, as soon as the paramedics unstrapped him, lunged, with surprising ferocity, at a nurse trying to attach a monitor. We managed to wrestle him back, to secure him before he could inflict any harm. But the incident sent a palpable wave of anxiety, a collective shiver of fear, rippling through everyone in the ED. Nerves were already frayed. This sent them skyrocketing. It was around 1:30 a.m., the night just past its midpoint, yet feeling like it had stretched into an eternity, when a second overhead announcement blared through the hospital intercom system. This time, the voice wasn't the usual cheerful PR spiel or the polite request for doctors to call specific extensions. This was different. Stern, automated, ominous. "Attention, all staff." The robotic voice echoed through the hallway, devoid of warmth, laced with an undercurrent of chilling urgency. "This is an emergency alert. The hospital is moving to partial lockdown. All available personnel, please report to your stations." Partial lockdown? In County General? I'd never heard of anything like it. Not in training, not in whispered hospital lore, not ever. Panic, raw and immediate, rippled through both patients and staff, a visible wave of fear washing over the already tense atmosphere. Whispers turned to frantic questions. Patients in the waiting area, already anxious about their own ailments, looked around with wide, bewildered eyes. Staff members, nurses and doctors alike, exchanged worried glances, their faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Some staff members, despite the lockdown announcement, instinctively tried to call home, to check on family, to seek reassurance in familiar voices. But cellular networks, already strained by the sudden surge in usage, started to sputter and fail, becoming frustratingly spotty. As for the landlines, the old reliable backbone of communication, every time anyone attempted to dial out, they were met with nothing but a relentless, mocking busy signal. The outside world, it seemed, was suddenly, terrifyingly cut off. My role, as overnight intern, was basic triage, which, tonight, meant I was essentially glued to the entrance, the point of first contact, the gatekeeper between the increasingly chaotic world outside and the, supposedly, sanctuary of the hospital. The automatic sliding doors hissed open and shut with alarming frequency, each cycle letting in a fresh wave of frantic people. They stumbled in, wide-eyed, breathless, claiming to have been attacked or witnessed attacks by neighbors, by strangers on the street, by people they no longer recognized. They used words like unsteady walk, vacant eyes, and raspy groaning, descriptions that, when strung together, painted a picture far more horrifying than any medical textbook illustration. And then, the hushed whispers among the staff, initially faint, tentative, now growing bolder, more frequent, impossible to ignore. They're like zombies. Is this some kind of zombie outbreak? I even spotted one man, a bystander who had fled the streets for the perceived safety of the hospital, wearing a ripped and bloodied t-shirt. Across the tattered fabric, ironically stark against the crimson stains, were the faded words, "Zombie Marathon 5K." It felt surreal, like some deeply disturbing, cosmic joke played out in the cold, sterile hallways of County General. Then, the hospital's overhead lights flickered, violently, plunging the waiting area into near darkness for a heart-stopping moment. A collective gasp went up from everyone in the lobby, patients and staff alike, a shared intake of breath held captive by the sudden, terrifying uncertainty. Then, with a low, reassuring rumble, the backup generator kicked in, bathing the corridor once more in its usual, sterile, unwavering glow. But the flickering, that momentary plunge into darkness, had amplified the fear, solidified the sense of impending doom. By now, the waiting area was no longer just waiting. It was overflowing, crammed with uneasy survivors. That's what we were starting to call them. Internally, amongst ourselves, the staff, the word carrying an unnerving weight. These weren't just patients anymore. They were people who had fled their homes, their streets, their lives, seeking refuge in the only place they could think of, the hospital. A few moaned about sudden, inexplicable, odd fevers. Others, unsettlingly, had shallow scratches on their arms, strange, inexplicable bruising that seemed to appear out of nowhere. But they all wore the same overarching expression, etched deep into their faces. Anxiety, raw and palpable, mixed with a bone-deep, soul-wearying exhaustion. I tried to do my part, to cling to the familiar routines of medical procedure, to push back against the rising tide of panic with the small, concrete actions I knew. Swabbing wounds, bandaging shallow cuts, wounds that looked suspiciously like bites, checking vital signs, trying to project an air of calm competence I definitely didn't feel. But each time I came across someone with that vacant, unfocused look in their eyes, someone with those unexplained, disturbing marks, a chill, icy and visceral, ran down my spine. That's when I noticed it. The triage software on my tablet, usually reliable, user-friendly, was glitching. Or maybe it was just overloaded, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of input. We'd never had so many incidents so fast. And all with the same terrifying, improbable pattern: bite wounds, or marks that looked like bites, escalating agitation, and sudden, spiking feverish symptoms. The system, designed for logical categories and established protocols, seemed to be choking on the sheer illogical horror of the situation. Then, at approximately 2:15 a.m., the overhead speakers crackled again. This time, the message wasn't just an alert. It was a pronouncement. The automated voice, even more chilling in its detachment, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through every corridor, every room in the hospital. "Attention," it declared, the word hanging in the air like a death knell. "We have received an emergency alert from local authorities. A potential infection event is in progress outside. A citywide curfew is now in effect. This facility is moving to a full lockdown. No one may leave or enter until further notice." Full lockdown. Not partial. Full. My stomach dropped, plummeted as if the floor beneath me had given way. I exchanged a frantic, disbelieving, horrified look with a few coworkers standing nearby. Janice, Dr. Ramirez, even the usually unflappable security guards. Their faces, illuminated by the sterile hospital lights, mirrored my own, pale, stricken, utterly unprepared for the reality that was now slamming into us. The steel shutters in front of the emergency department's main entrance, usually a symbol of after-hours security, now sounded like the grinding gears of a prison closing around us. They began to lower, slowly, inexorably, accompanied by a deafening, grinding mechanical hum that vibrated through the floor, through the very bones in my feet. Visitors, patients, those seeking refuge, rushed towards the doors in a panicked surge, protesting, pleading, demanding answers that no one had. Security staff, their faces grim now, their usual reassuring presence replaced by a stark, unyielding authority, did their best to maintain order, to hold back the rising tide of fear and desperation. An uneasy, suffocating hush fell over the entire waiting area, a silence more terrifying than any scream. Being locked in a hospital, it should have been reassuring, right? A place of healing, of safety, of refuge. If you trusted that help was on the way. But the insidious, creeping rumors of a zombie outbreak, whispered, then muttered, then openly spoken, quickly overshadowed any semblance of safety. The word infected became a toxic brand, tossed around in hushed, fearful tones whenever a new patient arrived with that glassy stare, that unnatural pallor, that sudden, inexplicable, violent urge to attack staff. People whispered theories, desperate to make sense of the senseless. The infection, they surmised, spread through bites. Others insisted it was airborne, carried on the very air we breathed, explaining the rapidly escalating spread. No one really knew. All we had were fragments, terrifying pieces of a monstrous, incomprehensible puzzle. The faint outline of the horizon hinted that dawn was approaching. Dr. Malik peered over the edge, checking for a safe way down, but we were high up, with no exterior staircase or helicopter landing pad we could find, just hard surfaces and old vents. A sense of helplessness settled over us. Sure, we'd escaped the immediate threat of the infected inside the building, but the city beyond looked eerily silent. Were we truly any safer here on this rooftop? In a small shed-like structure on the roof, likely for maintenance supplies, we discovered an old portable radio. It had a large antenna and rusted edges. Tiana fiddled with the knobs, trying to find any signal. The device crackled to life at one point, producing bursts of static. We briefly heard something resembling an automated message. "Emergency alert. Zombie outbreak. Then it fizzled out, returning to static. We stared at each other, equal parts relieved to hear anything at all and panicked by the confirmation of the ongoing crisis. Tiana tried adjusting the antenna, searching different frequencies, but the only thing that came through was more static, or an occasional faint beep. Our group sat in a circle, hugging our jackets against the chill breeze. Dr. Malik raised the question again, his voice heavy with the weight of our predicament. Do we try to get out of the city, or do we remain here and hope for rescue? Margaret hugged her knees, trembling. What if no one comes? What if this is everywhere? Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with the dawning horror of our isolation. Henry leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. The zombie outbreak, it might be citywide, maybe even nationwide. But there has to be a military or rescue operation. They wouldn't abandon us. His words were meant to be reassuring, but even he sounded uncertain. Lacey voiced another pressing concern, her voice weak but clear. We hardly have any food or water, and who knows how long this lockdown will last. Sarah added, her tone practical and grim. If we go back down, we risk running into more infected. It's a labyrinth down there now. We weighed the pros and cons, the arguments going in circles, each point punctuated by the distant groans we could still hear echoing from the stairwell below. Our supplies were dwindling, but at least we had some shelter on the roof, a temporary haven in the face of the unknown. The conversation looped, each argument ending in the same place. No clear answers, only more terrifying questions. Time passed slowly, each minute feeling stretched and thin. Eventually, the sun's first rays broke over the horizon, bathing the city in a dull orange glow. From our rooftop vantage point, we saw smoke rising from a few blocks away, as if a building had caught fire. The emptiness of the streets in the early light was haunting. No cars moving, no people walking, just a hush that made it feel like the entire world was holding its breath. We gathered near the edge of the roof, a quiet understanding passing between us. No matter which path we chose, staying here or attempting an escape, the future was uncertain, shrouded in danger. The radio remained useless. The hospital below was still crawling with infected. And beyond the hospital grounds, who knew what horrors might be unfolding? As we stood there, silhouetted against the growing dawn, Dr. Malik finally spoke up. His tone was resolute, yet tinged with desperation. We can't just wait. Sooner or later, we'll need food, medical supplies, and a safer place. We either try to make a run for it, or find a secure zone inside the hospital. But we can't stay on this rooftop indefinitely. I glanced around at the others. Margaret, Tiana, Derek, Lacey, Henry, Sarah. Their expressions reflected the same worry, the same gnawing fear that I felt. None of us wanted to descend into the building again, to face the horrors lurking within its walls. But staying here, exposed on the rooftop, was no guarantee of rescue. We were caught in a lose-lose scenario, with the entire city, possibly the entire world, in the grip of a zombie outbreak. What do we do? Tiana asked, her voice shaking, mirroring the tremor in all our hearts. Dr. Malik looked at me, searching for support, for some sign of resolve in this sea of uncertainty. I felt a lump in my throat, the fear constricting my voice. But I forced myself to speak, to muster something that felt like courage, even if it was just a thin veneer over raw terror. We gather what we can, I said, my voice trembling slightly, and decide together. Just then, as if to underscore the precariousness of our situation, a muffled crash rose from below, from the hospital interior. It sounded like something large and heavy had just collapsed. It served as a stark, brutal reminder that danger was still close, always present, lurking just beneath our feet. The morning breeze swept over us, carrying the tang of smoke and the faint echo of distant, mournful sirens, a haunting symphony of a world unraveling. And that's where our story hangs, suspended in the uncertain dawn. We stand on the roof of a locked-down hospital, with a few dwindling supplies and a handful of survivors, facing an unknown world outside. An emergency alert echoes across static-filled airwaves, a ghostly message in a digital void. Inside, the hallways echo with the groans of the infected, a chorus of the damned. We are caught between two impossible choices, neither offering a clear path to safety, trapped in a terrifying in-between. No one knows how long the lockdown will last. No one knows if reinforcements will ever come. We've glimpsed the horrors below, the moaning shapes that shuffle through corridors once filled with life, and we've heard the dire warnings of a zombie outbreak, while desperately clinging to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, help is still out there. We are left standing on the edge of the unknown, the sun rising on a city forever changed, our fate and the fate of countless others suspended in the quiet morning air. Will we find a way out? Or are we already out of time? I wish I had a final answer for you tonight, survivors, but the truth is, I don't. Thank you for listening. If this story sent shivers down your spine, if you found yourself holding your breath alongside Alex and the others, then please, hit that like button. Let me know you want to hear more of their story, to see what choices they make, what dangers they face next. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Join our community of survivors, and we can face the darkness together. Every subscription helps me keep bringing these chilling tales to life. Let me know in the comments what you think they should do next. Head back down into the hospital, or try to brave the city streets. Your theories and ideas are always welcome. And remember, in a world gone mad, stories are what keep us connected, what keep us human. Sleep tight, and try not to have nightmares. But if you do, at least you know you're not alone. Until next time, fellow survivors, stay vigilant.